In a quiet, sleepy town tucked away in the southern United States, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with old brick buildings, small shops, and dusty roads that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, or so they thought. But on this particular day, a stranger rolled into town, and his arrival would soon become the talk of the entire community. The man's name was Marcus Johnson. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with muscles that spoke of years of hard work and discipline. His dark skin gleamed under the afternoon sun as he rode into town on a sleek black motorcycle. The rumble of the engine turned heads as he passed by, drawing curious glances from people going about their daily routines. Marcus wasn't flashy or loud. If anything, he carried himself with an air of calm confidence, almost as if he didn't notice the attention he was getting. But the truth was, he noticed everything. Marcus had come to this town for one reason: peace. After months of grueling missions and high-stakes operations, he'd earned some much-needed time off. A decorated soldier in the Delta Force, a secretive and elite unit within the U.S. military, Marcus had seen more danger and hardship than most people could imagine. For now, though, all he wanted was a break. He'd rented a modest cabin deep in the woods just outside town, far enough from civilization to give him the solitude he craved, but close enough to grab a meal or pick up supplies when needed. When Marcus pulled up to a local diner called Sally's Spoonful, he decided it was time for lunch. The diner was a classic roadside joint, complete with red vinyl booths, checkerboard floors, and a jukebox playing country tunes in the corner. The smell of fried chicken and fresh coffee wafted through the air as Marcus stepped inside. He removed his helmet, revealing sharp features and piercing eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the room. At first glance, nothing about Marcus stood out too much. He looked like any other traveler stopping by for a bite to eat. But as he took a seat at the counter and ordered a burger and fries, he began to feel the weight of the stares around him. Some of the patrons glanced at him briefly before looking away, while others openly gawked. Among them was a group of bikers sitting at a large table near the back of the diner. They were rough-looking men, their leather vests covered in patches and symbols that left little doubt about their beliefs. One patch, in particular, caught Marcus's eye: a Confederate flag stitched proudly onto the chest of the leaders. The leader of the biker group went by the nickname Grizzly, a hulking man with a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos. He leaned back in his chair, his boots propped up on the table, and smirked as he watched Marcus. "Look who decided to show his face around here," Grizzly muttered to his friends, his voice dripping with mockery. The others chuckled, nodding along as they exchanged knowing looks. Marcus ignored them, focusing instead on his food. He had dealt with prejudice before, both in the military and in civilian life, and he knew better than to let it get to him. Still, there was something unsettling about the way these men carried themselves, their arrogance radiating like heat from a fire. They weren't just rude, they were dangerous. And yet, Marcus remained calm, eating slowly and deliberately, as if daring them to make a move. Grizzly grew restless as the minutes ticked by. He hated being ignored, especially by someone he considered beneath him. Leaning forward, he raised his voice, making sure everyone in the diner could hear him. "Hey you," he barked, pointing a meaty finger at Marcus. "You deaf or something? I'm talking to you." Marcus paused mid-bite, setting his burger down gently on the plate. He turned his head slightly, meeting Grizzly's gaze without flinching. "Something I can help you with?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. Grizzly sneered, leaning closer. "Yeah, actually. You can start by explaining what you're doing in my town." "This isn't your town," Marcus replied evenly, taking another sip of his soda. "Last I checked, it belongs to everyone." The comment only fueled Grizzly's anger. He slammed his fist on the table, causing utensils to clatter and drawing nervous glances from the other customers. "Don't get smart with me, boy," he growled, standing up and approaching Marcus. "We don't take kindly to outsiders round here, especially ones who think they can waltz in and act like they own the place." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he finished chewing his food, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and placed it neatly beside his plate. Then, with a calmness that bordered on eerie, he looked up at Grizzly and said, "I'm not here to cause trouble. Just passing through. If you've got a problem with that, maybe we should take this outside." The room fell silent. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Grizzly hesitated for a moment, surprised by Marcus's boldness. Most people would have backed down by now, intimidated by his size and reputation. But Marcus showed no fear, no hesitation. There was something about him, something unshakable that made even Grizzly pause. For a moment, it seemed like the tension might ease. Grizzly opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. He glanced at his friends who were watching intently, waiting for him to assert his dominance. Finally, unable to resist the pressure, he reached out and shoved Marcus's shoulder. "You got guts, I'll give you that," he snarled. "But guts ain't gonna save you if you keep running your mouth." Marcus didn't react. Not physically, anyway. Inside, however, his mind was already calculating, analyzing every possible outcome of the situation. Years of training had taught him to stay calm under pressure, to think several steps ahead. He knew how dangerous these men could be, but he also knew that reacting impulsively would only escalate things further. So he did what he always did in moments like this. He waited. Grizzly continued to taunt him, pushing harder and louder, trying to provoke a response. But Marcus refused to rise to the bait. Instead, he calmly asked the waitress for his check, signaling that he was ready to leave. As he reached into his pocket to pull out cash, Grizzly blocked his path, towering over him. "Not so fast," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You ain't leaving till we settle this." The diner was now completely still, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Marcus looked up at Grizzly, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, it felt like time itself had frozen. Then, with a subtle shift in his posture, Marcus prepared himself for whatever came next. Little did anyone know, the storm was about to hit, and nothing would ever be the same again. Grizzly's towering frame loomed over Marcus, his shadow falling across the counter like a dark cloud. The biker's fists were clenched, his face twisted in anger as he glared down at Marcus, who remained seated, calm and composed. "You think you can just walk out of here after disrespecting me?" Grizzly growled, his voice loud enough to shake the diner's walls. "Not happening, buddy." Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly folded his hands on the counter, his eyes locking onto Grizzly's. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said evenly, his tone measured but firm. "But I'm not afraid of it either." The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. For a moment, Grizzly seemed taken aback by Marcus's confidence. Most people would have cowered under his imposing presence, but Marcus wasn't most people. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, yet there was an undeniable intensity in his gaze that made Grizzly uneasy. Still, pride and arrogance pushed him forward. He couldn't back down now, not in front of his friends or the other patrons watching nervously from their seats. "You're gonna regret those words," Grizzly snarled, leaning closer until his face was inches from Marcus's. "This is my town and you're gonna learn your place." Marcus finally stood up, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He was taller than Grizzly had expected, his broad shoulders filling the space between them. Despite the height difference, Marcus didn't seem intimidated. If anything, he looked bored, as though dealing with Grizzly was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Your town?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. "Funny, I don't see your name on it anywhere." The jab hit its mark. Grizzly's face flushed red with rage, and without warning, he swung his arm, shoving Marcus hard in the chest. The force of the push sent Marcus stumbling back a step, but he quickly regained his balance. The diner erupted into gasps and murmurs as the tension reached a boiling point. Everyone braced themselves for what was sure to come next. A fight. But Marcus didn't retaliate. Instead, he straightened his jacket, brushing off imaginary dust as if Grizzly's aggression was no more bothersome than a fly buzzing around his head. "Is that all you've got?" Marcus asked, his voice dripping with calm mockery. "Because if it is, I'd suggest you save yourself the embarrassment and walk away." Grizzly's jaw tightened, his teeth grinding together as he processed the insult. No one talked to him like that, not in this town, not ever. He glanced around the room, seeking approval from his biker buddies, who egged him on with shouts of encouragement. "Take him down, Grizzly," one of them yelled, pounding his fist on the table. Another chimed in, "Show him who runs this place." Feeling the pressure to act, Grizzly lunged forward again, grabbing Marcus by the collar of his shirt. "You want to play games? Fine," he spat, yanking Marcus closer. "Let's see how tough you are when I knock that smug look off your face." For the first time since the confrontation began, Marcus's expression shifted. His lips curled into a faint smile, not one of fear or nervousness, but of quiet amusement. It was the kind of smile that sent chills down Grizzly's spine, though he couldn't quite explain why. Before Grizzly could process what was happening, Marcus moved. With lightning speed, Marcus twisted Grizzly's wrist, forcing him to release his grip. In the same fluid motion, Marcus stepped sideways, using Grizzly's momentum against him. The biker stumbled forward, losing his balance and crashing into the counter. Plates rattled, utensils clattered to the floor, and the entire diner fell, silent once more as everyone stared in stunned disbelief. "What the?" Grizzly sputtered, scrambling to his feet. His face was a mix of shock and fury as he turned to face Marcus again. "You're dead meat," he roared, charging toward him with his fists raised. But Marcus was ready. Years of training in hand-to-hand combat had honed his reflexes to near perfection. As Grizzly swung wildly, Marcus ducked and weaved, dodging every punch with ease. When Grizzly threw a haymaker aimed at Marcus's jaw, Marcus sidestepped and countered with a swift strike to the biker's ribs. The blow landed with a dull thud, causing Grizzly to grunt in pain and stagger backward. The other bikers jumped to their feet, shouting obscenities as they rushed to their leader's aid. One of them grabbed a chair, hoisting it above his head, like a weapon. Another pulled a chain from his pocket, swinging it menacingly. But Marcus didn't panic. Instead, he assessed the situation with the precision of a chess master, calculating each move before it happened. When the first biker swung the chair at him, Marcus ducked, letting it crash harmlessly into the wall behind him. He then grabbed the man's arm, twisting it until the chair dropped to the floor. A quick knee to the stomach sent the biker doubling over in pain. Meanwhile, the second biker lunged at Marcus with the chain, but Marcus caught his wrist mid-swing, stopping the attack cold. With a sharp twist, he disarmed the man, sending the chain clattering to the ground before delivering a precise elbow strike to the side of his head. Grizzly watched in horror as his friends fell one by one, unable to land a single hit on Marcus. His initial bravado began to waver, replaced by a growing sense of dread. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was the toughest guy in town, the one everyone feared. How could this stranger, a man he'd dismissed as weak and unworthy, be dismantling his crew so effortlessly? Desperation took hold of Grizzly as he realized he was running out of options. Summoning every ounce of courage he had left, he charged at Marcus head-on, hoping to overwhelm him with sheer brute force. But Marcus saw it coming. Just as Grizzly reached him, Marcus pivoted to the side, planting his foot firmly on the floor. Using Grizzly's own momentum, he spun the biker around and slammed him face first into the wall. The impact echoed through the diner, leaving Grizzly dazed and breathless. He slumped to the ground, clutching his nose, which was already beginning to bleed. The remaining bikers froze, their earlier bravado evaporating as they stared at Marcus in awe and terror. None of them dared to make another move. Marcus stood tall, his breathing steady despite the chaos around him. He adjusted his jacket, ensuring it sat perfectly on his shoulders, and glanced around the room. Every eye was on him, some filled with admiration, others with fear. The waitresses huddled behind the counter, peeking out cautiously, while the regular customers whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. "Anyone else?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority that silenced any lingering dissent. When no one responded, he nodded and turned toward the door. Without another word, he walked out of the diner, leaving behind a scene of utter devastation, and a group of humiliated bikers nursing their wounds. As Marcus mounted his motorcycle and revved the engine, he felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because he'd defended himself without resorting to unnecessary violence. Sadness because moments like these reminded him of the ugliness that still existed in the world. Shaking off the thought, he kicked the bike into gear and rode away, disappearing down the dusty road as the townspeople began to piece together the story of the mysterious stranger who had taken down 6 angry bikers without breaking a sweat. Little did Marcus know, however, that this was far from over. The bikers weren't the type to let such a humiliating defeat go unpunished, and they were already plotting their revenge. What Marcus didn't realize was that his presence in this small, quiet town was about to ignite a storm unlike anything anyone had seen before. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet town as Marcus rode his motorcycle back to the cabin. The cool evening breeze brushed against his face, offering a brief respite from the chaos of the day. Despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, Marcus felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had handled the situation at the diner with precision and restraint, just as he'd been trained to do. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. Men like Grizzly didn't take losses lightly, especially not in front of their friends, or an entire diner full of witnesses. As Marcus pulled into the gravel driveway of the cabin, he parked his bike under the cover of tall pine trees. The cabin was small but cozy, nestled deep in the woods where the only sounds were the rustling leaves and distant chirping of crickets. It was exactly what he needed, a place to decompress, far removed from the noise and judgment of society, or so he thought. Inside, Marcus flicked on the lights and set his helmet on the kitchen counter. He poured himself a glass of water, savoring the silence for a moment before heading to the window to check the surroundings. Years of military training had taught him to always be vigilant, even in seemingly safe environments. Something about the confrontation earlier had left a nagging feeling in the back of his mind, a subtle warning that trouble might follow him here. And he was right. A few miles away, Grizzly and his gang were nursing their wounds in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town. Bottles of beer lined the table, and angry voices filled the room as they plotted their revenge. Grizzly's nose was swollen and dried blood streaked his shirt, but his pride was hurt far worse than his body. For a man who prided himself on being untouchable, getting humiliated by a stranger, especially one he considered beneath him, was unbearable. "This ain't done," Grizzly growled, slamming his fist on the table. "That guy thinks he can walk all over us, make us look like fools. Not on my watch." His crew nodded in agreement, fueling each other's anger. One of them suggested calling it quits, arguing that Marcus clearly wasn't someone to mess with. But Grizzly wouldn't hear it. "You think I'm going to let some outsider come into my town and embarrass me like that?" he snapped. "No way. We're finishing this tonight." The plan was simple: ambush Marcus at his cabin. They didn't know much about him beyond the fact that he was staying out in the woods, but they figured catching him off guard would give them the upper hand. Armed with bats, chains, and makeshift weapons, the bikers piled onto their motorcycles and roared out of the bar, their engines growling like predators on the hunt. Back at the cabin, Marcus's instincts kicked into high gear. As darkness fell, he noticed faint headlights bouncing through the trees in the distance. At first he thought nothing of it. Locals sometimes drove through these parts, but when the lights disappeared abruptly, leaving only the sound of idling engines, he knew something was wrong. Marcus moved quickly, scanning the area outside the cabin. He grabbed a flashlight and a sturdy walking stick he'd found earlier, knowing better than to underestimate his opponents. These weren't trained fighters. They were reckless and fueled by rage, which made them unpredictable and dangerous. But Marcus had faced far worse in his career, and he wasn't about to let a group of angry bikers ruin his peace. He stepped onto the porch, his eyes scanning the tree line. The forest was eerily quiet now, the usual nighttime sounds replaced by an unnatural stillness. Then, without warning, the first biker emerged from the shadows, charging toward the cabin with a baseball bat raised high. Marcus reacted instantly, sidestepping the swing and using the walking stick to trip the man. The biker stumbled, crashing to the ground with a loud thud. Before Marcus could react further, Another figure burst from the woods, swinging a chain, wildly. The metal links whistled through the air, narrowly missing Marcus's head as he ducked. With a swift motion, he grabbed the chain mid-swing, yanking the biker forward and delivering a sharp elbow strike to his ribs. The man dropped like a sack of bricks, groaning in pain. More bikers appeared, surrounding the cabin in a loose semicircle. Their numbers gave them confidence, but Marcus remained unfazed. He moved with calculated precision, dodging attacks and countering with efficiency. When one biker lunged at him with a knife, Marcus disarmed him with a twist of his wrist, sending the blade flying into the dirt. Another swung a pipe at his legs, but Marcus jumped back, avoiding the blow and retaliating, with a kick to the man's knee. The crack of bone echoed through the night as the biker collapsed, clutching his leg in agony. Grizzly watched from the edge of the clearing, his heart pounding as he realized his crew was no match for Marcus. His men were falling one by one, their bravado crumbling under the weight of Marcus's skill and composure. Finally, unable to stand by any longer, Grizzly charged forward, wielding a heavy tire iron. "You think you're tough, huh?" he shouted, swinging the weapon with all his might. Marcus saw the attack coming and stepped aside, letting the tire iron smash harmlessly into the wooden railing of the porch. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Grizzly's arm, twisting it until the weapon slipped from his grasp. With a firm grip, Marcus spun Grizzly around and pinned him against the railing, applying just enough pressure to keep him immobilized without causing serious harm. "You've got two choices," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. "Leave now and never come back, or stay and see how much worse this gets for you. Your call." Grizzly struggled briefly, but the pain in his arm forced him to relent. Defeated and humiliated once again, he muttered a curse under his breath and signaled for his remaining crew to retreat. Within moments, the bikers scrambled to their feet, dragging their injured comrades back into the woods. The sound of revving engines faded into the distance, leaving behind only the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Marcus stood on the porch, watching as the last traces of the ambush disappeared into the night. His breathing was steady, his expression calm. He hadn't enjoyed the fight, not really, but he understood that sometimes standing your ground meant showing others they couldn't push you around. Still, there was a heaviness in his chest as he thought about the cycle of violence and hatred that seemed to follow people like Grizzly wherever they went. After ensuring the area was clear, Marcus returned inside and locked the door. He leaned against the counter, closing his eyes for a moment as exhaustion began to set in. Though the immediate threat was gone, he knew this wasn't the end. Word of what happened tonight would spread, and while some might admire his actions, others would side with the bikers, blaming him for stirring up trouble. As he sat down to collect his thoughts, Marcus reflected on the events of the past few hours. He hadn't asked for any of this, he'd simply wanted a quiet place to rest and recharge. Yet here he was, caught in the middle of a conflict he hadn't started but couldn't ignore. The world was complicated, messy, and often unfair, but Marcus had learned long ago that running from problems rarely solved anything. Sometimes you had to face them head-on, even if it meant standing alone. Little did Marcus know, his actions that night would spark conversations throughout the town, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their community. Some would rally behind him, inspired by his courage and resilience. Others would cling to their prejudices, unwilling to change. And somewhere in the shadows, Grizzly and his gang would lick their wounds, plotting their next move. But for now, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of peace. He turned off the lights, settled into a chair by the window, and gazed out at the starlit sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight he was content to sit in silence, listening to the gentle hum of the forest and reminding himself why he fought. For justice, for respect, and for the hope that someday the world might be a little less cruel. By morning, news of the confrontation at the cabin had spread like wildfire through the small town. The story traveled from house to house, fueled by whispers and speculation. Some versions exaggerated Marcus's actions, painting him as a superhero who single-handedly dismantled an entire gang of bikers. Others framed the incident as a brutal attack, portraying Grizzly and his crew as victims of unwarranted aggression. Regardless of the details, one thing was clear: everyone had an opinion. The local sheriff's department wasn't far behind. Deputies arrived at Marcus's cabin shortly after sunrise, their patrol cars kicking up clouds of dust on the dirt road leading to the property. Marcus was already outside when they pulled up, leaning against the porch railing with a mug of coffee in hand. He greeted them calmly, his demeanor unchanged despite the chaos that had unfolded the night before. "Morning," Marcus said, nodding politely as the deputies stepped out of their vehicles. "Something I can help you with?" Sheriff Daniels, a grizzled man in his late 50s with a weathered face and a no-nonsense attitude, approached first. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, shading his expression. "We got reports of some trouble out here last night," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Mind telling me what happened?" Marcus didn't hesitate. He recounted the events, plainly, explaining how the bikers had shown up uninvited and attacked him without provocation. "I defended myself," he added simply. "Didn't go looking for a fight, but I wasn't about to let them hurt me either." The deputies exchanged glances, unsure how to proceed. On one hand, Marcus's calm explanation made sense. His injuries were minimal compared to the cuts, bruises, and broken bones suffered by several members of the biker gang. But on the other hand, Grizzly and his crew had filed a complaint, accusing Marcus of assault and claiming they'd only been trying to talk things out. Sheriff Daniels scratched his chin thoughtfully. "You know these boys are pretty banged up, right? One of them might need surgery for a busted kneecap." "They brought it on themselves," Marcus replied evenly. "If they'd left me alone, none of this would have happened." While the deputies debated whether to take Marcus in for questioning, curiosity got the better of Sheriff Daniels. Something about Marcus didn't add up. He was too composed, too skilled, too different. After excusing himself for a moment, the sheriff made a quick phone call to a contact at the Department of Defense. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. Marcus Johnson wasn't just any ordinary traveler. He was a highly decorated Delta Force operative currently on leave after serving multiple tours in some of the most dangerous parts of the world. When Sheriff Daniels returned, his tone had shifted slightly. There was still authority in his voice, but also a hint of respect. "Mr. Johnson," he began, "we're going to need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. But based on what I'm hearing and seeing, it sounds like you acted in self-defense." Marcus nodded, setting his coffee mug aside. "I'll cooperate fully," he said. "But I hope you understand why I couldn't just sit back and let them do whatever they wanted." The deputies escorted Marcus to the station, where he spent the next few hours answering questions and providing a detailed account of the events. Meanwhile, word of his identity leaked to the public. By mid-afternoon, the entire town knew who Marcus really was. Conversations buzzed in diners, gas stations, and grocery stores as people tried to reconcile the quiet stranger they'd seen at Sally's Spoonful with the elite soldier now making headlines. For many residents, the revelation sparked a mix of emotions. Some felt guilty for judging Marcus so quickly, realizing how wrong they'd been to assume he was just another outsider causing trouble. Others doubled down on their prejudices, refusing to believe that someone like Marcus could deserve respect or admiration. "So what if he's in the military?" one man muttered at the barbershop. "That doesn't excuse what he did." But not everyone shared that sentiment. A group of locals, including the waitress from the diner who had served Marcus during the initial confrontation, rallied around him. They saw his actions as justified, a stand against bullying and hate, and admired his composure under pressure. "He didn't start anything," the waitress told anyone who would listen. "Those bikers were asking for it." As the day wore on, tensions in the town grew palpable. Supporters of Marcus clashed with defenders of the bikers, sparking heated arguments in public spaces. At the same time, national media outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on the small southern town. Reporters flooded the area, eager to interview witnesses, dig into the history of racial tensions in the region, and hear Marcus's side of the story. Marcus, however, avoided the attention as much as possible. After being released from the station, With no charges filed, he returned to the cabin, hoping to ride out the storm in peace. But even there, he couldn't escape the scrutiny. News vans parked along the main road leading to the woods, and reporters hiked through the forest in search of an exclusive interview. Marcus turned them all away, politely but firmly, declining to comment until the investigation was complete. Back in town, Grizzly and his gang fumed over their public humiliation. Not only had they failed to intimidate Marcus, but they'd also been exposed as cowards who picked fights they couldn't win. Their reputation was in tatters, and they blamed Marcus entirely. Huddled in a dingy motel room on the outskirts of town, they plotted their next move. "We can't let him get away with this," Grizzly growled, pacing back and forth. "He thinks he's untouchable now, but we'll show him otherwise." His crew nodded in agreement, though their enthusiasm was tempered by fear. None of them wanted to face Marcus again, not after what they'd experienced, but they couldn't admit defeat. Instead, they devised a plan to strike where Marcus least expected it: his sense of safety. They wouldn't confront him directly this time. Instead, they'd target the one thing he seemed to value most: his solitude. Under the cover of darkness, the bikers returned to the woods, avoiding the cabin and focusing instead on the surrounding area. They slashed tires on Marcus's motorcycle, cut power lines running to the cabin, and left threatening messages carved into trees. It was petty vandalism, meant to unsettle rather than harm, but it served its purpose. When Marcus discovered the damage the following morning, he knew exactly who was responsible. Though frustrated, Marcus refused to let the intimidation tactics rattle him. He repaired the damage methodically, reinforcing the cabin's security and setting up additional deterrents using items he found around the property. Fishing wire stretched across paths, makeshift alarms rigged from tin cans, and strategically placed logs created obstacles that would slow down intruders. If the bikers wanted to play games, Marcus was more than ready to meet them on his terms. Meanwhile, the divide in the town continued to widen. Community meetings were organized to address the growing unrest, with residents taking sides in increasingly heated debates. Some argued that Marcus's presence had disrupted the fragile balance of the community, while others insisted that the real problem lay with the deeply ingrained prejudices that allowed men like Grizzly to operate unchecked. At one such meeting, a young woman stood up and addressed the crowd. Her name was Emily Carter, a teacher at the local high school and a vocal advocate for equality. "This isn't just about Marcus or the bikers," she said, her voice steady but passionate. "It's about us, about who we want to be as a town. Are we going to let fear and hatred dictate our actions, or are we going to stand up and say enough is enough?" Her words resonated with many, sparking a wave of reflection among the townspeople. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in the walls of prejudice that had long divided the community. People started having difficult conversations, challenging old beliefs and confronting uncomfortable truths. For the first time in years, there was a glimmer of hope that change might be possible. But change never came easily, especially in places where tradition and fear ran deep. As Marcus watched the town wrestle with its demons from afar, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. He hadn't asked to become a symbol of resistance or a catalyst for transformation. All he'd wanted was a quiet place to rest. Yet, here he was, caught in the middle of something much bigger than himself, and somewhere in the shadows, Grizzly and his gang plotted their final revenge, a move they swore would settle the score once and for all. The night was darker than usual, the moon hidden behind thick clouds that blanketed the sky. The air was heavy with humidity, and the forest surrounding Marcus's cabin felt alive with rustling leaves and distant animal calls. But beneath the natural sounds of the wilderness lay an unnatural tension, a quiet unease that seemed to seep into every shadow. Marcus sensed it immediately as he stepped outside to check the perimeter of his property. He had spent the earlier part of the evening reinforcing his defenses, setting up traps and alarms designed to alert him if anyone or anything approached the cabin. The fishing wire stretched taut across paths, tin cans hung from low branches, and logs were strategically placed to create obstacles. It wasn't paranoia driving him, it was preparation. Years of experience had taught Marcus that underestimating your enemy was a fatal mistake, and Grizzly's gang had proven themselves to be persistent if not particularly clever. As Marcus moved silently around the cabin, flashlight in hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual nighttime noises, the chirping of crickets, the hoot of an owl, were eerily absent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, leaving the woods unnervingly still. Marcus paused for a moment, listening intently. His training kicked in, sharpening his senses and heightening his awareness. He scanned the tree line, his eyes adjusting to the darkness as he searched for any sign of movement. Then he heard it, a faint snap, barely audible over the silence, a twig breaking somewhere to the east. Marcus froze, his grip tightening on the flashlight. Whoever it was, they weren't professionals. Professionals would have known better than to make noise. No, this was amateur work, the kind of clumsy stealth that came from overconfidence rather than skill, and Marcus knew exactly who it belonged to. Grizzly and his gang had returned. Marcus didn't panic. Instead, he slipped back inside the cabin, grabbing a sturdy walking stick and positioning himself near the door. He left the lights off, plunging the interior into darkness so he could see outside more clearly through the windows. From here, he had a perfect vantage point to observe the approaching danger while remaining hidden himself. If the bikers thought they could catch him off guard, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Minutes passed like hours as Marcus waited, his patience unwavering. Then finally, shapes began to emerge from the shadows. 4 figures crept toward the cabin, their movements awkward and hesitant. They carried makeshift weapons, chains, bats, and even a crowbar, but their body language betrayed their fear. This wasn't the bold ambush they'd attempted before. This was a desperate attempt to reclaim their pride. One of the bikers tripped over the first trap Marcus had set, his foot catching on the fishing wire. The sudden jerk sent a cascade of tin cans clattering to the ground, the noise piercing the silence like a gunshot. The biker cursed loudly, stumbling backward as the others scrambled to figure out what had happened. Marcus allowed himself a small, fleeting smile. The game had begun. Without warning, Marcus stepped onto the porch, his silhouette illuminated briefly by the dim glow of starlight. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he called out, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority. "You boys lost?" The bikers froze, caught between surprise and panic. Grizzly, standing slightly ahead of the group, tried to mask his hesitation with bravado. "This ain't over, soldier boy," he spat, stepping forward despite the obvious disadvantage.
"You think those little tricks are going to stop us? You messed with the wrong people."
Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned casually against the railing, letting the tension build. When he finally spoke, his tone was measured but laced with quiet menace. "Last chance," he said. "Walk away now, or I'll make sure you regret it." For a moment, it looked like Grizzly might actually listen. His eyes darted nervously around the clearing, taking in the traps Marcus had laid out like breadcrumbs leading to their doom. But pride, and perhaps shame, won out. With a roar of defiance, Grizzly charged forward, signaling for his crew to follow. What happened next was almost comical in its predictability. The second biker triggered another trap, slipping on a patch of loose dirt Marcus had intentionally dampened earlier. He went down hard, landing flat on his back with a groan. A third biker swung blindly at Marcus with a chain, only to get it tangled in a cluster of low-hanging branches. As he struggled to free the weapon, Marcus stepped in close, delivering a sharp strike to the man's wrist that forced him to drop it entirely. Grizzly, meanwhile, had made it to the porch, swinging his crowbar with wild abandon. Marcus sidestepped each blow effortlessly, using the narrow space to his advantage. When Grizzly lunged too far, Marcus grabbed his arm, twisting it until the crowbar clattered to the wooden planks. A quick sweep of his leg sent Grizzly crashing to the ground, where he lay gasping for air. By now, the remaining biker had realized the futility of the situation. He dropped his bat and raised his hands in surrender, backing away slowly. "We're done," he shouted, his voice trembling. "Just let us go." Marcus nodded, stepping back to give them room. "Get out of here," he said firmly. "And don't come back." Grizzly pushed himself to his feet, bloodied and humiliated once again. For a moment it looked like he might try one last reckless attack, but the look in Marcus's eyes stopped him cold. There was no anger there, no malice, just a quiet resolve that promised swift and merciless retribution if provoked further. Grizzly muttered something unintelligible under his breath, then turned and limped away, his crew trailing behind him like wounded animals. As the sound of retreating footsteps faded into the distance, Marcus exhaled slowly, allowing himself a brief moment of relief. He retrieved the fallen weapons and secured them inside the cabin, ensuring they wouldn't pose a threat if the bikers decided to return. Then he stood by the window, watching the forest for any lingering signs of movement. Only when he was certain they were truly gone did he allow himself to relax. But the victory felt hollow. Marcus knew better than most that violence rarely solved anything. It only delayed the inevitable. Grizzly and his gang might have been defeated tonight, but the hatred that fueled them ran deeper than any single confrontation could erase. Until the root causes of that hatred were addressed, the cycle would continue, spreading pain and division wherever it went. Back in town, the fallout from the latest incident rippled through the community. Some residents praised Marcus for defending himself and protecting his property, seeing his actions as a necessary response to aggression. Others criticized him for escalating the situation, arguing that his superior skills gave him an unfair advantage. The debate raged on, dividing families, friends, and neighbors in ways that few had anticipated. At the same time, national media coverage intensified, shining an unflinching spotlight on the town's struggles with racism and inequality. Journalists interviewed locals, highlighting both the progress being made and the challenges that remained. Activists arrived, organizing rallies and workshops aimed at fostering dialogue and promoting understanding. For the first time in decades, difficult conversations were happening, not just behind closed doors, but openly and honestly. Marcus, however, stayed out of the fray. He declined interview requests and avoided public appearances, choosing instead to focus on maintaining his own peace. Sitting on the porch one evening, he watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The beauty of the moment was undeniable, yet it was tinged with sadness. He thought about the countless battles he'd fought, both literal and metaphorically, and wondered if true peace was ever truly attainable. As the stars began to twinkle above, Marcus reminded himself why he kept fighting. Not for glory or recognition, but for the hope that someday, somewhere, the world might be a little less cruel. And though the road ahead was long and uncertain, he knew he wasn't alone. Across the country, others were standing up, speaking out, and working tirelessly to create a better future. Together they formed a quiet army of resilience, a force strong enough to challenge even the deepest-rooted injustices. For now, Marcus was content to play his part, one small step at a time. The days that followed the biker gang's failed ambush were a turning point for the small town. The incident had ignited conversations that many residents had avoided for years, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their community. For some, it was a wake-up call, a chance to reflect on the prejudices and biases they had either ignored or accepted as normal. For others, it was a bitter pill to swallow, one that left them defensive and resistant to change. But no matter where people stood, everyone agreed on one thing: life in the town would never be the same. Grizzly and his crew disappeared from public view after their humiliating defeat, retreating to lick their wounds and nurse their bruised egos. Rumors swirled about what they planned to do next, but Marcus knew better than to underestimate them completely. He continued to fortify his cabin, keeping a watchful eye on the surrounding woods and ensuring he was prepared for any future threats. Still, the immediate danger seemed to have passed, allowing him a rare moment of peace. In town, the debate over Marcus's actions and the broader issues they represented reached a fever pitch. Community meetings became standing-room-only events, with passionate speeches and heated arguments dominating the discussions. At one such meeting, Emily Carter, the young teacher who had spoken out earlier, took the stage again. This time, her words carried even more weight. We've spent too long pretending these problems don't exist, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. But the truth is, they've been here all along, hiding in plain sight. What happened with Marcus wasn't just about him. It was about us. It showed us who we are, and it gave us a choice. We can continue down this path of division and hate, or we can come together and build something better. Her speech resonated deeply with many attendees, sparking a wave of introspection and action. A group of concerned citizens formed a committee dedicated to addressing racial tensions and promoting inclusivity in the town. They organized workshops, film screenings, and panel discussions aimed at fostering empathy and understanding. Local businesses began displaying signs supporting diversity, while schools incorporated lessons on tolerance and acceptance into their curriculums. Slowly but surely, seeds of change were planted. Not everyone welcomed these efforts, however. Some residents dug their heels in, doubling down on their prejudices and accusing the reformers of trying to erase tradition. Grumbles of discontent echoed through diners and bars, where old-timers grumbled about the good old days when things were supposedly simpler. Tensions occasionally boiled over, resulting in shouting matches or passive-aggressive exchanges at grocery stores and gas stations. But for every person clinging to the past, there were two more willing to embrace the future. Marcus observed these developments from afar, choosing to remain largely removed from the fray. He understood that real change took time and effort, and he respected those working tirelessly to make it happen. Yet he also knew that true progress required more than just words. It demanded consistent action and accountability. So when Sheriff Daniels approached him with a request to speak at a community event, Marcus hesitated. "I'm not looking for attention," Marcus told the sheriff during their conversation. "I came here for peace, not to start a movement." "Sheriff," Daniels nodded, leaning back in his chair. "I get that," he said, "but sometimes whether we like it or not, our actions inspire others. You've already done more than you realize, Marcus. People look up to you, not because of what you did to those bikers, but because of how you handled yourself afterward. If you're willing to share your story, it might help bridge some of these divides." After much thought, Marcus agreed. He didn't want to be seen as a hero, but he recognized the importance of using his platform to encourage dialogue and understanding. On the evening of the event, held in the town's modest community center, the room was packed with residents, eager to hear what he had to say. Standing at the podium, Marcus felt a mix of nerves and determination. He wasn't used to speaking publicly, but he knew the message he wanted to convey. Taking a deep breath, he began. "When I first came to this town, I wasn't looking for trouble," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "All I wanted was a little peace and quiet, a chance to step away from the chaos of my job and recharge. What I found instead was something I hadn't expected, a reminder of the challenges we still face as a society. Racism, prejudice, fear, they're not abstract concepts, they're real, and they affect people's lives every single day." He paused, scanning the crowd. Some faces were attentive, others skeptical, but all were listening. "I'm not here to judge anyone," Marcus continued. "We all carry baggage, shaped by our experiences and upbringing. What matters is what we do with it. Do we let fear and ignorance control us, or do we choose to learn, grow, and stand up for what's right? That choice is ours to make." His words struck a chord, prompting murmurs of agreement throughout the audience. When he finished speaking, the room erupted into applause, with several people rising to their feet. Marcus stepped back from the podium, feeling a mix of relief and hope. For the first time since arriving in town, he felt like he had contributed something meaningful, not as a soldier or a symbol, but as a human being sharing his truth. As the weeks turned into months, the town began to transform in subtle but significant ways. Conversations that once ended in arguments now led to compromises. Neighbors who had avoided each other started exchanging greetings and smiles. Even the diner where Marcus's journey had begun saw changes. Sally's Spoonful became a gathering place for diverse groups of people, united by a shared desire to move forward. For Grizzly and his gang, the road to redemption proved harder to navigate. Their reputation was in ruins, and attempts to reassert dominance only isolated them further. Eventually, some members of the group sought counseling and support services offered by the new initiatives in town, recognizing that their anger stemmed from deeper insecurities and pain. While not everyone changed, the fact that some did gave Marcus reason to believe in the possibility of transformation, even for those who seemed beyond reach. When Marcus finally decided it was time to leave the cabin and return to duty, he did so with a sense of fulfillment. The town wasn't perfect, it likely never would be, but it was moving in the right direction. As he packed his belongings and prepared to ride off into the sunrise, he reflected on everything that had transpired. He had entered the town seeking solitude, but he left having sparked a shift toward unity and understanding. The townspeople gathered outside the cabin to bid him farewell, offering handshakes, hugs, and words of gratitude. Emily Carter presented him with a handmade quilt stitched together by members of the community as a token of appreciation. "You may be leaving, but your impact stays with us," she said, smiling warmly. "Thank you for reminding us that courage isn't about fighting. It's about standing up for what's right even when it's hard." Marcus accepted the gift with humility, touched by their kindness. As he mounted his motorcycle and revved the engine, he glanced back one last time at the faces watching him go. Then, with a nod of respect, he kicked the bike into gear and rode off, disappearing down the winding road that led out of town. Behind him, the sun rose higher in the sky, casting golden light over the landscape. It was a new day, not just for Marcus, but for the town he had unknowingly helped reshape. Challenges remained, of course, but the foundation for lasting change had been laid. And as Marcus disappeared into the horizon, he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes, even in the unlikeliest places, hope could take root and flourish. For Marcus Johnson, the fight for justice and equality was far from over. But as long as there were people willing to stand alongside him, he knew the battle was worth fighting. One step at a time, one act of courage at a time, the world could become a better place. And that was a mission worth dedicating his life to.